As a single father of a growing child that was having some difficulties in making friends, I entered my son to a camp so he could work on his social skills. I thought that it would be best for Ivan to be around kids of his same age, but I did not consider the possibility that my son would get bullied because of his shy personality. There was a particular boy in the camp who spearheaded a prank to my child, and he got lost in the woods because of this irresponsible behavior. Ivan was just a 15-year-old kid who went on a camp for the very first time and knew nothing about surviving in the woods. To make matters worse, they were camping near a vast forest that would take days to search. Needless to say, I was enraged when the campmaster told me about the unfortunate news. I discovered that the boy who instigated the prank was the grandson of the town's mayor. When I held him responsible for his behavior, he even had the audacity to put the blame on me for making Ivan join the camp despite of not knowing anything about the woods. The town's mayor was a pompous old man who claimed that he was a proficient hunter back in the day, and it was hard to hold an argument nor reason with him because of his delusional arrogance and eccentric behavior. He was tolerated by the folks who relied on his donations. Aside from his sponsorship to the campsite and other amenities, Mayor Gennady also shared a lot of tall tales to the locals about his hunting skills and rare encounters. He incorporated these supernatural beliefs to his well-being and wealth. One of his most widespread stories was when he captured a silver stag during one of his hunts. He claimed that the mythical stag healed his ailment so he would let it go in return, and he never had any health complications despite of his long history of several medical conditions since then. As a form of trophy, he took home one of its antlers and kept on showing it off every time he had the chance to do so. He threw in these random far-fetched stories to display his vast life experience and made me look ignorant when I confronted him about his son's ill-mannered behavior, and I got nothing else in that confrontation aside from learning where the kid got his bad personality. I was accompanied by a couple of rangers and the campmaster to search for my son, but I did not receive any help from the man who should be held accountable for this unfortunate incident. We trekked the woods for days, but we did not find him. The deciduous forest was simply too big, and we couldn't find any traces of him on the designated trails. Aside from hunger and thirst, my son was also in danger of being attacked by wild animals. On the third day of the search, the others were already losing hope in finding Ivan. But as a father, I would never give up on my son. I went further and further into the woods until I was already in an unknown zone. The next thing I knew, I also could not figure out where I was. I was leaving marks on the trees so I could easily retrace my path, but when I came around, I could no longer find the markings and completely lost my track. As the sun went down, it became even harder to get back. I just went ahead and searched for a place to camp for the night, and it was then when I came across strange things that I wouldn't have believed in if I hadn't seen them with my own eyes. When I was looking for a safe place to spend the night, I found a wolf track on the ground that was significantly larger than anything I've seen before. My initial reaction was to steer clear from the tracks, but I also considered the grim possibility that my son might have been taken by this giant hound. Heavy-heartedly, I cautiously traced the tracks and tried to be as stealthy as I possibly could. Whether I would find the remains of my son or the giant wolf itself, there was nothing in the end of the track that I would be pleased to see. However, I kept on following the trail, and I was led to something that was even more bizarre and far harder to believe. Surrounded by odd-looking mushrooms and a fence with leaves growing on the pickets themselves, I found a very strange hut that was fully composed of roots and vines. I could see a lamplight shining through the window which suggested that someone was inside there at the time, and I instinctively hid behind the trees because of what happened next. I was spooked beyond belief when the thick roots from the sides of the wall suddenly moved like tentacles, and they formed a shape of bird-like legs with thighs, joints, and talons. As I was totally astounded by what was happening in front of me, the reason why I was there had slipped my mind. Few seconds later, I was reminded of it when I heard a sound of a faint growl right next to me. I slowly turned my head, as my heart was pounding so rapidly while I was sweating profusely, and my soul almost left my body when I saw the massive head of a giant wolf just a few inches away from me. It was drooling while its large fangs were in full display, and I thought that I was done for right there and then. But all of a sudden, I heard a very hoarse voice of an old lady, I turned my eyes at the back of the giant wolf, and I was utterly dumbfounded when I saw an old woman sitting on it. Her facial features were comically disproportionate, and her severely wrinkled skin added more to her frightening appearance. She was glaring at me with a piercing stare, and her thick, furrowed brows cast shadows to her eyes. Her nose was disproportionately long, and her teeth were clanging like pieces of metal as she spoke. I was profoundly terrified that I didn't even hear what she said to me while I screamed at the top of my lungs. Based on her appearance and the things that I had seen so far, I had no doubt in my mind that she was the infamous witch from the old Slavic folklores. The bizarre hut that had just grown a pair of bird legs made of roots was her home, and this terrifying old hag riding a giant wolf was no other than Baba Yaga herself. I already accepted my death while I was frozen in fear right in front of this infamous witch, but then I suddenly heard a very familiar voice when it responded to my scream. I heard Ivan's voice coming from the hut. He was alive all along, and he was calling for me. Baba Yaga grinned from ear to ear when she realized that I was the father of the child she took. I ran towards the hut and broke in without hesitation, and there I saw Ivan tied on a chair with moving vines. The witch came right behind me and casually said that she was saving my son for later. I was enraged, but just the mere domineering presence of the witch alone was more than enough to tell me that we wouldn't be able to escape from her. I went down on my knees and begged her to spare my son as I was bawling my eyes out. Unexpectedly, she suddenly made a bargain. The Baba Yaga told me that something was taken from the forest which belonged to her, and she did not want to directly meddle with humans to get it back. She grabbed a cane rested on the wall and showed me the broken pair of silver antlers tied on its end. She told me that one of the antlers broke off while she was roaming around the woods, and it was no longer there when she came back to retrieve it. Baba Yaga said that she would let my son go if I could find the broken piece and bring it back to her. I stood up and promised her that I could get it back. Coincidentally, I knew exactly where to find it, since the man who took it had been bragging about it all these years with his made-up story. Guided by a red-eyed crow, I ran back to the woods and returned to the town. I am willing to do anything for my son, and I immediately came up with a plan so I could steal the antler of the silver stag from the town's mayor. He had a number of businesses all over the town, and one of them was a farm that resided several blocks away from his house. Without hesitation, I started a fire on the property and spread it across the field as fast as I could. The owner rushed to his farm to handle the situation. Mayor Gennady went all frantic about the incident that he ordered all of his men to help and stop the fire from spreading. As a result, there was nobody left in his house but a couple of maids and his son who was fast asleep. This gave me enough time and opportunity to sneak into his house and take his most valued trophy. When I was able to retrieve the broken piece of the silver antler from our arrogant mayor, the red-eyed crow guided me once again and we headed back to Baba Yaga's hut. Despite of her terrifying appearance and inhumane choice of meal, the witch from the folktales kept her word and let Ivan go. Along with an incredible story that I could never tell anyone, I was able to save my son from being eaten. Apparently, not everything from the mayor's story was a lie. A couple of days after I stole the antler of the silver stag, he became terminally ill. Few days later, the old man Gennady passed away from multiple organ failures. I personally did not like the man, but I couldn't help but feel responsible for his death. The mere display crest of Baba Yaga's cane was the only thing that was keeping him alive all these years, and its effect disappeared when I took it from his home. But even though I felt guilty for what I did, there was no helping it given the situation that we had. It didn't belong to him to begin with, and I would still do the same thing without hesitation if my son's life is on the line.